Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane, and it's a very pleasant but reasonably fresh morning up here on the edge of the Lancashire Moors and Pendle Hill behind me. Clear skies, except that there should be a beautiful sunrise, but once again, it seems that every aircraft in the Northern Hemisphere has been flying between Manchester and the East Lancashire area here. And so the cloud has this artificial sheen right across the sun. Anyway, I mean, isn't it Bill Gates and Harvard and the Royal Society who all talk about geoengineering and yet try and raise it with any British MP and they immediately turn and run in the other direction? Sheer fear about something that people are starting to observe on an increasing basis. Well, the title of this morning's broadcast on the morning of Wednesday, the 6th of February 2019, is The Corruption of Humanity. And although this has been obviously going on for a long time, but I have this sort of fundamental altruistic view that humanity is primarily good, that humanity actually has the capability and capacity for mutual cooperation and compassion. But that has effectively been bought by this group of global corporatists, these socio-psychopaths who believe that everyone has their price. And sadly, through fear, there's no question many people do. That's fear of not being able to put a roof over your head, fear of not being able to put food on the table. And so every single day, unfortunately, millions of people on the corporatist payroll make decisions that they know to be fundamentally wrong, or at best flawed. Yet, rather than confront, rather than challenge, rather than question those instructions or orders, it's yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, because if they don't, then they fear that by the end of the month they actually may have no salary check. And sadly, the vast majority of people in this country, and indeed in the Western world now, are perhaps at best 3 months or 3 salary checks away from being on the cusp of homelessness. And this is a fear that unfortunately keeps people out of their true self and forces them to be a corporate whore. And no one can relate to that better than me, because that was certainly the situation that I was in up until some 20 odd years ago, when perhaps a bit of realization that there had to be more to life than being in a situation, albeit a well-paid one, where when the company said jump, you didn't even need to ask how high, you knew what was required. And sadly, we have the results of the clear results of people doing what they believe to be necessary to get their next salary check. And the result of that is the likes of David Noakes being in Wandsworth Jail for the heinous crime of producing and distributing a product that has proven to be extremely effective in treating cancers and many other conditions. And one of David's major customers, was Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet, who had gone out on a limb in the US and was treating autistic children and adults with GC-MAF, and claiming that there were tremendous results, up to and including getting people into school after a relatively short course of GC-MAF. And these were people who had been previously unable to be put into the public school system due to them being effectively on the autistic scale. Well, David is obviously having to endure his time in Wandsworth, and it's not something that comes easily for him. Fortunately, he has a cell on his own, but I went to see him on Monday, and first of all, let me make the observation. He asked me to pass on his extreme gratitude to all those people who have taken the time to write to him since he was jailed at the back end of November last year. And, obviously he is doing his best to write back to everybody. But obviously his apologies if he doesn't manage to get to everybody in perhaps a short time scale. But, obviously it's not a pleasant experience. It's not one that one would expect somebody to have to endure who had put their phenomenal effort and indeed their personal resources into setting up a business which, in his opinion, was for the benefit of humanity. But of course, it went completely against the grain of Big Pharma, and so they get their henchmen at the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, which is effectively a quasi-government body. And, many of these people on the senior management of the MHRA are straight out of the pharmaceutical industry. And, of course, their job is to make sure that nothing comes to market which threatens the revenue streams of the pharmaceutical industry. So, what many people don't know is that a couple of years, or nearly 3 years ago now, the Medical Treatments (Innovations) Act was passed into law. And this was a private member's bill driven by Chris Heaton Harris, who's the Tory MP for Daventry in Northamptonshire. And he picked up the gauntlet after a previous attempt by Maurice Sarchi, who tragically lost his wife to cancer. And Maurice Sarchi was very much aware that there were alternative treatments available elsewhere in the world, but not approved by the MHRA, and so consequently his wife wasn't able to have access to those treatments. So Maurice Sarchi sought about bringing a bill to effectively circumnavigate the domination of the pharmaceutical industry. And anyway, this came into law in 2016, and this provides a vehicle for doctors, for medical practitioners, to use a novel medicine to try it out, obviously provided that the recipients, the patients, were properly advised and told what was occurring and given full information, which of course isn't given when you just take approved pharmaceuticals. But nobody knows this. Nobody knows this. Why? Because Big Pharma does everything it possibly can to suppress any knowledge, any awareness, and certainly any application of the Medical Treatments Innovations Act 2016. And, many people will be aware that recently Saeed Javid made a big deal about approving cannabis oil that has had the THC removed, so CBD oil, and approved that. And of course, there was a big campaign about a child coming back to the UK and in need of this treatment, and Saeed Javid claimed the responsibility for being the superhero who made CBD oil legal in the UK. Well, actually, of course, he wasn't telling the whole truth, because the only reason he did that was because CBD oil was given approval by the European Union's regulatory authorities, and consequently the UK, as part of the EU, simply had to fall into line. But, never let an opportunity go to waste, so Saeed Javid sort of jumps out with the big S on his chest saying, I'm the guy. I'm the one who's introduced this into the UK. Well, watch what happens next, because the European Union regulatory bodies have decided that they are going to withdraw the licensing for CBD oil. And the reason being, obviously, that it is having far too much success, and it is impacting on Big Pharma revenue streams. So Big Pharma have lobbied the European regulatory bodies and effectively forced them to withdraw their approval. So what is Saeed Javid going to do now? Obviously, he's going to come up with some excuse as to why it is that CBD oil is no longer approved after a relatively short period of approval from him. So my advice is, if you are using or feel that you may need to use CBD oil, which is currently legal in the UK, then stock up, because the likelihood is that in the very, very short term, CBD oil is likely to be unapproved. Unless, of course, we get out of the EU. And, of course, March 29th has to be the date when we come out of the EU. And, of course, there's, an increasing stance around the country that not only should we just pull the plug on the EU on March the 29th, but tell them that they can whistle for their 39 billion. Because, frankly, the way both UK and European politicians have handled this negotiation over the past 2.5 years is nothing short of derisory. I mean, if this is the best that European and UK politicians can come up with, then it pretty much shows the degree of incompetence. And the fact that, they're not given an appropriate marching order, so they have no idea how to use their personal initiative. Well, if our current politicians are unable to negotiate an appropriate exit and embrace the opportunity for global trade, then they need to step aside and let others in there who do have the intellectual capability and capacity and tenacity to drive the Brexit through, to put the UK back into the global arena. And as I've said before, it's not going to be pretty, because there's going to be a massive effort by the global banksters and the global corporatists to literally bring this country to its knees. Pretty much like the US did with Cuba, back in the 1960s. And look how Cuba has thrived. It hasn't been easy for them by any stretch of the imagination. And neither will it be easy for the people of Venezuela, as they once again experience the full force of the global corporatist sanctions, because President Maduro won't play ball with the global corporatists, and in particular the banks and the hydrocarbons industry. Anyway, so coming back to David Noakes for a second. David also was working with a biochemist who faced no charges in the UK, but the French authorities, the French equivalent of the MHRA, OSLEP, are trying to extradite her to France. And this has been ongoing now for 3.5 years. She's effectively in a state of limbo, just as David and the other defendants were in this state of limbo, kept on a very short rein, bank accounts frozen, having to report to the police station every Monday morning, surrendering passports, etc. Well, David's partner is now facing extradition, and that hearing is scheduled at the moment to take place in Westminster on March the 12th. And apparently the legal team is saying, well, there's no need to turn up, we can sort this out without you. No, we need to scrutinize this hearing. So as details become available, of course, I will share them. And it's imperative that the court at Westminster, if it's at Westminster, is absolutely rammed, so that the legal process is held to scrutiny. Now, of course, once again, this is the French authorities acting under the instruction of Big Pharma, because they want to put the fear of God into anybody who's even thinking about coming up with a very effective cancer treatment. Anything that affects the revenue streams that are associated with chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And thanks to the 1939 Cancer Act, the pharmaceutical industry has had absolute dominion over all life, effectively, or certainly all human life that develops cancer for some 80 odd years now, isn't it? So that's the date for your diary, March the 12th. And obviously, I will keep that posted. So the MHRA, this is an extremely corrupt quasi-government body manned by former pharmaceutical industry executives. And, you know, if you want to take a bit of a look at the MHRA and the role they have in making sure that people stay sick, then go to the website mhracorrupt.st. And of course, I will actually put a link up beneath this live stream. Now, elsewhere, in fact, Forbes magazine about a week ago ran an article saying that an Israeli biotech company has claimed that it will have a cancer cure within 1 year. So you could bet your bottom dollar that the pharmaceutical industry are now descending upon this company in Israel and descending upon the Israeli government and putting enormous pressure on them to make sure that this company does not follow through with its statement of having a cancer cure within a year. It'll never come to market. I mean, this is a bit like the water-powered vehicles that come to light. They get promotion within the national media, and then that's it. Never hear anything more about them, because the full force of the hydrocarbons industry comes down on the relevant government bodies to make sure that these products never actually come to market. So that's a company called Biotechnologies Limited, and the chief executive officer is a guy called Ilan Morad. So, take a look, and let's put this company on the map, and let's see what happens, see whether they are able to follow through, or whether basically they go the same way as any other company that develops immunotherapy against cancer, and they just simply disappear. So elsewhere, of course, there are others who challenge the establishment, and consequently on Friday I will be in Newcastle. And please, come along to Newcastle Crown Court on the quayside in Newcastle for Friday morning. I should be there from somewhere sort of around about 9 o'clock or so, and support Mark Steele. Now, this is the appeal hearing against Mark's conviction for allegedly using threatening behaviour against a couple of local councillors who were and have consistently refused to answer any questions regarding the rollout of 5G and LED street lighting in the northeast. So this time Mark has legal representation. He has a barrister coming up from London. The risk of using a barrister from the northeast is that they might be doing a little bit of work with the apparent authorities up there, and be compromised. So bring somebody up from London who has no links with the area and can do hopefully an outstanding job of representing the interests of the residents of the northeast and prevent this abomination of 5G and the LED street lighting being further rolled out. And people need to start, just as they were 6 years ago, starting to look at the potential impact of fracking. And that ultimately turned into a very, very powerful nationwide community activist movement. And basically, the community has to pick up the same gauntlet with 5G. The difference here is that whereas fracking was primarily targeting people in rural communities, the people who are at greatest risk are those living in the urban areas. And it's been reported that both Bristol and York, the universities there, were test beds for the rollout of 5G, and the increase in student suicides in both of those campuses is, how shall I say, somewhat perhaps coincidental. And I just heard literally within the last couple of days that a student union representative who has attempted to flag up that the number of student suicides at Bristol is actually higher that is being officially reported. He has been relieved of his responsibilities at the Students' Union and is at risk of having his tenure or his course studies terminated. So 5G, a massive concern. If it's not, it should be. LED streetlights, if they're not a concern, take a look at the work of Exeter University and the Barcelona Institute of Global Health and their study on LED street lighting and the related increase in prostate cancers amongst men and breast cancers amongst women, primarily because both of these cancers are hormone driven, and the frequencies of the LED streetlights are effectively hormone disruptors. So anyway, if you want to get a bit more information, then obviously come along to Newcastle Crown Court at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. The case will actually start at 10 a.m. prompt. Elsewhere, of course, Ben Gilroy is currently incarcerated in Ireland for making the observation that the Irish courts were corrupt. The only problem was that he made that in a sworn affidavit, and is currently serving 3 months for contempt of court. But, you know, Ben was simply making the observation in a sworn statement that basically we all know to be true. There are, whilst I readily accept, there are certainly very sound, honest members of the legal profession. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. And Ben was simply making that observation and now is paying the price. And well, hopefully Ben is out soon, because you know, Ben is scheduled to be one of the speakers at AV10. But hey, you know, we're nothing if not dynamic, and you know, we shall, as always, make sure that AV10 speakers are people who are absolutely current, that what they have to say is absolutely right up to the minute, and it will be people whose analysis of the ongoing situation I have absolute respect for. Well, very briefly, elsewhere in the world, of course, France and Venezuela, not really seeing too much in the lamestream media about either of them. I have received some information from France which suggests that the problems there are not only increasing, but that the establishment is running very, very scared. And one of the statistics that I'm actually seeking to get another source on is the number of police suicides, because the number that I've been given is really quite difficult to believe. It's so high. So before I make any statement on it, I want to try to verify this number. But it's very clear that there are members of the French police, the gendarmerie, and even within the CRS, who are extremely concerned about being instructed to fire directly at the heads of the protesters. Now, from other reports that are released and even some YouTube video, it's very clear that some of the CRS are clearly, you know, buying into the indoctrination and are relishing the opportunity to fire directly at the heads of the protesters. And of course, there are increasing reports that the police or CRS, the riot police that are facing the yellow vests, are not from France. And of course, this is a tactic that has been used, you know, right since the Roman Empire. You know, you don't use police or troops from one particular country to assault on people from the same culture, because there might be a degree of hesitation. So you bring in troops or police from elsewhere and there is no such compunction, you know, no emotional attachment whatsoever to the people that they're facing. And so consequently, you know, the number of head injuries, the number of fingers that have been blown off, the number of feet that people have had to have amputated as a result of grenades exploding within close proximity. If this was anywhere else in the world, of course, there would be talk of NATO intervention. But this is France. It's the heart of the global corporatist now trying to demonstrate that they will hold on to their dominion, whatever it takes. And anyone who still thinks that remaining in the EU is a good idea needs to take a very, very close look at what's going on in France right now. And of course, in Venezuela, I made an observation on Monday. I said that, the US and the UK and other nations now recognizing Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela over Maduro was like, China and Russia recognizing Jeremy Corbyn as the legitimate prime minister in the UK. But actually, that's not strictly the case. It's worse. Recognizing Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela is like France and China announcing that they recognize John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, as the legitimate leader of the UK. This is how absurd it is. And, clearly from the comments that I received after the live stream on Monday, it's very clear there's a lot of people who are still buying in to the official narrative that it's Maduro that's causing the problems for his country. Actually, those problems, just like many of the problems for the likes of Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and Assad, and of course Cuba, those problems are brought about because of the sanctions, because the global corporatists are pissed off that the person at the head of government in those countries isn't going to dance to their particular tune. So the message really is, I know it's very difficult, but let's try to encourage people to stand in their own power. And if they're in the employ of a company who is asking them to do something which they know to be inappropriate or fundamentally wrong, that they have the courage to say, you know what, I'm just not going to do that. And the one example I will give you that has come into my possession is the email that was sent around to council employees in mid-December. And this is from a council in South Devon. And this memo was advising council employees that there were going to be letters sent out and house visits to people who were in arrears on council tax, threatening legal action or eviction. And these letters and these visits were going to take place on Christmas Eve. What kind of sociopath actually thinks that that is appropriate behavior? Well, thanks for joining me this morning. As I've said, I will be in Newcastle on Friday. So please join me either in person at the Quayside, Newcastle Crown Courts on Friday, or join me for the live stream at 8:30. You have a great day, and let's encourage everyone around us to do the right thing. You take care now.